Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome to some kind of ugly lighting. I don't know what's going on right now. I do like the contrast. It's kind of artistic looking, you know? You got your contrasto. I don't remember. It's been years since I took design. But you know, that out of the way, we're back. It's part 5 of the Shoegaze chart. And that means we're talking about 10 more Shoegaze albums. And today, here's the thing. We're talking about some of the best albums we've talked about in this chart so far, because shoegaze is one of those genres that just has so many masterpieces. If you were going to take like 10, 15, probably even like up to 40 albums I've talked about, and we're like, yeah, this is one of my favorite albums, I would totally agree with you. I'd be like, that's totally a worthwhile pick. But today, half of these I would disagree with. While we have some of the best and some of the most iconic, we also have some of the worst, and some of them that don't even need to be here. And a lot of this kind of revolves around this sort of jangle pop sound that comes in real awkwardly, is incredibly dated, and has the most awkward, over-the-top British vocals ever. And you know, sometimes it can have more British sounding vocals, you know? King Crimson did it all over Lizard, and that's an album that I love to bits. But that fits more because it's the medieval aesthetic and it feels all antiquated and stuff. But today, we are talking about albums that are not like that, but we are talking about some albums that are like that. And first, it is Moose with Withxyz. So this is given the distinction of more minimal from the happier side after Loveless. And yeah, it's more minimal. It's especially quirkier though. But also, I will say it's kind of fun. It is pretty standard jangle pop with a huge dream pop edge to it. But the jangle pop edge, as well as the vocals, kind of pull you out of the experience. If the title track had no whistling, yeah, someone's whistling on it for some reason, and a different vocalist, it would be an iconic landmark shoegaze track. But the fact that this is not the case means that, well, it's just what it is. This whole thing sounds kind of like Britpop era Verve, but not nearly as good. 4 times as boring and half as charismatic. That's a weird thing with this shoegaze chart, is that you can see there are so many albums that really have this cool vibe, and we're going to be talking about some of those today. But especially Were was one of those bands that really was like, yeah, we're here and we're super cool. This is a band that is like, we're here and we're total goons. Like, we're just, you don't want to talk to us. You sit away from us. This is a very hit or miss record. That being said, there are some very blissful moments here. Some of the guitar parts are fantastic. It's just when it reaches the more acoustic bits, the more really hooky songs, I really don't need those at all. I give this an okay. It's maybe worth a listen. And then we go into Happier with the band Kitchens of Distinction with the album Strange Free World. Kitchens of Distinction is one of the worst band names I've ever heard in my life, and the quality of the album is reflected perfectly with that. It's extremely dated. It's pretty annoying as well. And this vocalist is worse than the Moose vocalist. He's like the guy from Vandergraaf Generator. I think it's Peter Hamill, but like actually worse. And if you can't get with Vandergraaf Generator's vocalist, then you will hate this, because it's not a very talented vocalist. His vocal inflections are all over the place. His vocal timbre is bizarre. Also, this is the only album, this is maybe the second album I've ever heard, other than like a Cherubs album, that I would actually describe as a broken album. There are actual bits of data that are not there. The album goes silent at points just because it's like gone. I will say though, the song Under the Sky Inside the Sea is the best track here. It's the most deserving of being called shoegaze. It's the most distinguishing into a shoegaze pattern here, and it's rather enjoyable. So if you want to grab a song from this album here, pick that one. But this whole thing, it sucks. I give it a poor. And yeah, if you've been keeping track, that is the first pour I've given on this whole shoegaze chart, which is pretty impressive. You know, I've been covering this black gaze chart at the same time. I've probably given like 5 pours over there. And you know, on Math Rock, I gave a pour or 2. Like, all of these charts have something bad on it. And the fact that it took us 5 parts, 42 albums to get there? Anywho, let's stop talking about music that's bad and get to music that's good. This is just overwhelming with joy, and this is the band Moscow Olympics, and this is the album Cut the World. So this is actually a very different vibe already, and it's pretty rad. So it's got a bit of lo-fi production here that really makes it sound nice in a way that we really haven't touched upon since like the noisier sections. It also dips a lot into post-punk at points, and you might be wondering, like, how is this overwhelming with joy if it's post-punk? It actually pulls it off pretty well. I know it sounds like a thing that might not be consistently successful, because I know the best post-punk albums are typically a little more on the sad side, but this here is actually rather successful. It's a strong contender, and it never dips into jangle pop. An excellent decision. Songs like Ocean Sign have this gorgeous wall of sound, and this is a really gorgeous sleeper hit of an album. It's less on the noisy side, a bit more on the dreamy side, stuff we haven't touched upon too much, and it's great. It's also not that long, so I think it's worth your time. Next we get the band School of Seven Bells with their album Alpinisms, and now we've reached more of an electronic side of shoegaze, specifically more of the indie-tronica influence. So this album's got indie-tronica laced shoegaze with some female vocals, and it's pretty fun. It's also pretty eclectic here. You're gonna get hints of stuff like Bjork, maybe some down-tempo, maybe some trip-hop, some pretty experimental stuff, some really interesting walls of sound as well. And a lot of the Bjork style comes from the vocal delivery. It's got this almost alien quality to it. The Bjork linkage might be a stretch to some. It has like an association with it. I'm not really saying it sounds like Bjork. Sempiternal Aramonth, or however you pronounce it, because my writing is currently terrible, is an 11.5-minute just drone fest of some of the best walls of sound on the record, and you'll be hearing for the day. There's also a whole lot of earworm bass hooks going on here that really grounds this whole thing and keeps it from dipping into the ambient territory too much. I will say though, some of these songs do pass you by. I can't recall everything that happens on this album, but what I can recall was very effective and sounded great. So I do feel like giving this a good. And then we reach the band A Sunny Day in Glasgow with the album Scribbling Mural Comic Journal. This is a band that I've seen that's kind of underrated. Their Rate Your Music scores are not perfect, and I don't get why, because this album actually I found to be rather inspiring. It's more electronic tinged than School of Seven Bells, but at the same time, it's way more hypnotic. It has this truly sublime effect that I've never heard many bands replicate, and if they do, it's not as consistently. 515 Train is an incredibly gorgeous track, and it has these insane builds that really I don't see that often. The B-side of this whole record is super random, and it throws all these super bizarre ideas at the wall, and yet all of them really stick. It's kind of hard to describe in one quick little thing here, but I really encourage you guys to check it out, because this is a great album. Give it a great, It's fantastic, super eclectic. The electronics are super hypnotic. The wall of sound on half of these tracks here are gonna blow your mind. And next we reach the band Lush with their album Split. This is a band that I'm sure many of you have been looking forward to me talking about, or at least you've probably been like, when is he gonna talk about this? You might not be looking forward to me talking about it. And I will say I'm a bit underwhelmed, because this is probably one of the 10 shoegaze albums people do talk about out there. And so I was expecting something really grand, and it kind of fell a bit flat. Basically, if you would do anything for the sound of Cocteau Twins, if you would die for it, you would probably love this album too. But it's like Cocteau Twins, but not as good. It's very much alt-rock type of sound, with a lot of really bright distortion as well, and that's kind of when you can kind of pull it away from the Cocteau Twins comparisons. And this current mastering version sounds a bit dated. I think it could have used a remaster before me listening to it. I don't really prefer this version's sound as much as what would be more modern sounding. I will say the opening track, Light from a Dead Star, is like the best thing ever though. It's got this really interesting instrumental palette and it works perfectly. But the rest of the first half of the album doesn't really compare. I will say the second half of the album is much better in comparison, and it kind of gets me to grade this thing as a good album. It's good. I just find it a tad bit overrated. And then we reach the band that I've been looking forward to a bit, Ringo Death Star, with the album Color Trip. Now, if you were looking for more of the cool Whir style shoegaze, but less depressing, Ringo Death Star is your baby. And they're my baby too, because this is a fantastic album. It's noisy, it's got some attitude, it's rockin', it's summery, and it's bright, and it's got this crispy sun-bleached bass tone that works so perfect with this whole thing. It's literally like the light distortion from a 35mm camera when you take like a printable photo. Both songs, Tambourine Girl and Chloe, will 100% get you a girl. Let me tell you right now, for all the fellas out there, if you're gonna pick up a girl and you're not gonna play hip-hop in front of her, or you're not gonna play jazz or whatever, any of that, and she wants to listen to some rock music, play Tambourine Girl and Chloe. She will think you're the coolest. Do I have personal experience playing these songs in front of them? No, I just heard this on a plane ride the other day. Let me tell you, there's going to be some ladies on the show once I start playing these two songs around some women, you know. But this album just reeks with coolness. It's so cool. It sounds great. Drumming is great. As far as three-piece bands go, doesn't get much better. And the vocals, they trade off and they sound just fantastic. It's got kind of the attitude of like You Made Me Realize era of My Bloody Valentine. So, you know, good stuff. This is great. I don't know really what else to say about it. It's great. And next, we reach the album Citrus by the band Asobi Sexu. So contrary to the couple minutes of me talking that I've just edited out would say, this band is not from Japan, but the lead vocalist is from Japan, and it does have a distinct Japanese sound to it. You can hear in the semi-J-rock inspired riffs, but it is not distinctly like that. But at the same time, more than anything, this is an incredible shoegaze album, and one that you definitely need to be talking about, because this thing blew my mind. So it's got this really fun and gorgeous guitar tone paired up with this really nice percussive and rumbly bass tone. It's like a love letter to the older bands from the 90s and late 80s, yet it still stays fun and interesting. The vocals are phenomenal, and they are produced absolutely perfectly. They'll hit like this high note where like this interesting like reverb or chorus effect will sort of like lift it off. And it's a really interesting thing, and I've never heard many things like it. It actually does show up a little bit on that Ringo Death Star record, but here it's all over. And the drumming is really active and intense. It's not just the rhythm, you know. It has all these really interesting drum solos and tom fills that are really intense, actually. It really keeps the momentum through the roof on this thing. Red Sea, because of its length, you'd probably expect to be this drone fest because it's over 7 minutes long, but actually you're treated to this rather progressive track until it ends on this like shoegaze take of like a Swans track where it sounds like it's like gonna end like a couple minutes early, and these fills just get bigger and bigger and the effects are stacked upon each other. It's the most insane post-rock liftoff I've heard in recent memory. It's utterly incredible. And this whole album, honestly, it's a one-of-a-kind thing. And it's totally great. Give it a listen. And after those albums, we get Happiest with the band Ride and their album Going Blank Again. Now, this album sticks out a lot because people on Mew every day would post about this album and how it's better than Loveless. Now, is it true? No. But from what I remember listening to Nowhere for the first time, this album is better, and this should be in the conversation as well. First of all, I want to say that the drumming on this album is amazing. Really intense rhythmic moments. This whole thing sounds super dense. And it's got this insane roaring guitar sound with a bright summery finish that is really, you can't replicate it. Because any heavier, any even tiny bit, even like a single bite better, and it'll sound too aggressive. It'll totally lose the feeling. And there is a tiny bit of jangle pop thrown in here, and I know I've been complaining about that a lot, but it actually only adds to the poppy, hooky nature of this whole thing, and it keeps it more engaging than ever, rather than pulling it into some ridiculous, overly British territory, or really have no substance at all, and people just expect you to love it because it's a pop song, and it fills up 4 minutes of time. If you can't tell, I don't like jangle pop at all. This whole project gives a feeling reminiscent of Swerve Driver, but instead of the more rock-oriented sound of that album, it's more of like this poppy sound wall. And this thing still is a rock record, don't get me wrong, but it has a prettier sense to it, and it's got more happy, more upfront emotions. It's also very danceable, and it's very psychedelic, and it's great. And next it says, now with exotic instruments with the band The Boo Radleys. And this is the album Giant Steps. This is an album that really contrasts between its bright, loud shoegaze moments with a lot more quiet. And it definitely has that dated jangle pop influence. And the exotic instrumental is just horns on a few tracks. I think I remember seeing somewhere that there was like cello somewhere, but it's really not that distinguishable. So let me get this straight here. This album is usually not shoegaze, typically boring, occasionally brilliant. And I mean that. Some of this stuff is the best shoegaze you'll ever hear. And some of it is like watching paint dry. I will say, there is not a second on this album that sounds bad. This whole thing, sound quality-wise, is great. There isn't a second where I would be like, yeah, I wouldn't include what that sound is on my record. It's just, A lot of it is dragged out. A lot of it does not fill up its pacing. There's so much filler on this record that it's insane. I will say Leaves in Sand is actually one of the best shoegaze tracks you'll ever hear, though. It battles between these little acoustic bits, and it grows into this insane, huge, roaring guitar section towards the end of the track. And it's really something you can't deny. It's really something you can't forget. I still remember it, and I was like, this can't be on this album. This is far too good. But you know, you might have a different opinion than I do. I give this thing a good, but some people love this thing from end to end. Just that person's not me. So that was 10 albums, but this chart reaches, I believe, 61 albums. So I'm covering one extra album for you guys today because I love you. But I don't love this album right here. This album is Blind Mr. Jones with Stereo Musicale. If you thought the Boo Radleys was a bad band name, Blind Mr. Jones, it's a band name. Everyone, let's start the British People Have a Decent Band Name Challenge 2022. Or 23, you know, that's on the horizon. Or just British people don't make something goofy in your music challenge. I'm slandering British people a lot today. So what is this album? It's shoegaze with flute. Crazy, I know. But yeah, if you can't tell, that's not enough to carry an album its whole way. And it has an obnoxious amount of flute. If you don't like the sound of a flute, ignore this thing. It's not used in a way like Peter Gabriel was using flute in Genesis. It's more like extremely obnoxious. There are a few tracks where it works, but at the rest of it, it feels like it's exotica. And it feels almost like a weird caricature of like some other culture, something like that. It feels insensitive, oddly enough. Not to mention it's unnecessary 90% of the time. But actually, when there is a thick shoegaze wall of sound, the flute works in this album's favor. But songs like Small Caravan that lack the rhythmic intensity of the opening 3 tracks of the album are an unfortunate mess because they do not have the power to keep you attached or entertained for nearly as long. It's certainly lush, and it's usually pretty, but it's not always interesting. The song Lonesome Boatman is a snooze fest, as well as many of the tracks around it. Yeah, there's not much else I have to say about this thing. I'll give it an okay. I think there are a couple songs that are fine. You know, if you made an EP out of the first 3 tracks and not make this like an hour-long thing I have to sit through this ridiculous flute playing for, and instead use it to accentuate the walls of sound, you know, the point of shoegaze, then I might appreciate it. And some of you might go in the comments and be like, oh, Duke, there's no point to any music genre. It's just what the artist puts on it. Okay, it still sucks. But you know, speaking of sucky things, it's time for me to say goodbye. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. You know, like and subscribe. Comment down below if you like these albums, what you think of them. Please listen to Asobi Sexu. Please listen to a lot of these. Tell me what you think about them. Social media in the description, Discord in the description. And that's about it. Have a good day. Bye.